it's me again. Alright, this is going to be somewhat of a small little art tutorial. I also noticed that with my last video, my little tour, I didn't actually label that video or the other video, so I kind of screwed up on that one. But, right, because I don't have anywhere to actually hold my phone whilst I draw, I'm basically going to do step by step how I kind of draw. I do normally draw quite, I kind of just free write, I don't do super talented drawing, I don't do crazy stuff, I just, draw for the sake of drawing, anything flies, that's kind of it. Right. Normally I draw with a pencil, but I decided not to. I'm going to draw with a pen. So normally when I'm going to draw, as an example, a person, an ordinary person, and let me think, how about a guy that works, he does weightlifting, or no, that's gonna be a difficult one to draw, especially because I'm just gonna be lifting my phone up and down. Let's do a pizza guy as an example. Normally I'd start with drawing the neck. It's easier, I'm doing it as a portrait, and I'm also doing it as an angle where the actual character is looking dead at me, because it's a lot easier to draw when they're actually facing towards you than, let's say, side on. It's always a lot harder. So I typically start with two lines that are basically in parallel with each other. It doesn't really matter the size just yet. So as an example, I normally start like this. It's not focus. There you go. Normally I start something like that, and slowly the actual lining will start to become a little bit more defined. So then afterwards, I normally like to start with defining the lines a little bit more towards the neck, which connects to the head. So as an example, this would be the body, or the upper torso, and then I can start drawing a little bit more muscle, or the actual body parts. And right, if I do this, I do this, and like as an example, you kind of keep carrying up. I know it looks odd, but you will slowly start to see the face will start to form once I start drawing a side to side. It starts to connect. Oof, my pen is dying. Speaking of dying, I feel like I'm dying. I've got such a horrible cold. Typical UK weather. Very, very, very rough. Okay. I normally, after you draw the ridge, I normally like to add a little bit of more detail, because it gives the head more of a 3D shape. Now that I'm actually looking at my drawing, it looks like he's looking side on. So I'm going to stick with that idea, with his head being more side on. It also helps if you draw ridges around the neck area. Do little scratches. It gives it more of a realism whilst keeping that skin texture. You don't want to look very scratchy. You don't want it to look very rough. As an example, I like to do something like this. I know I kind of screwed up when it comes to this line here, as it's supposed to be a little bit more even, but you gotta go with the flow. Even if any drawing isn't necessarily the best drawing, it's, think of it as you learn from each step. Now, when it comes to the face, it's a lot harder to actually draw a face. You know, I know people normally like to do the method where you kind of have like a line down the middle, so so each body part is evenly, like the eyes, you know, are evenly separated side to side, which you can do. But like as an example, you know, like if you write manga or you do comics, you don't that's not necessarily something you want when you're drawing. You don't want over detail. You don't want, because it can take away from the actual character or what is going on. It also just, you know, if you're reading a manga, you're not very, like, let's be honest, do you really care if whether or not the character's eyes are on point or anything? No, you care more about the actual action. I'm going to also do a little bit of lighting. Have it so the lighting is facing to the right, and then the dark edge is facing to the left. Mostly it's just to add some contrast. I'm also going to do an ear, but because it's not in the light and its head is facing a little bit to the side, right, I'm going to black out the ear, as it will create a little bit more of a sense of depth with the character, whilst also keeping the lining on the edge, you know, okay. It's hard to explain, but it's almost like keeping the line going straight down and then having a void fill in this, which, in fairness, I could have it so it goes a little bit more down, which creates a little bit more of a thinner neck, which looks a little bit more human. You know, we don't want a kind of Baki Hanma muscular man. We just want an ordinary person who delivers pizzas. Though, in fairness, if I wanted to do that, I could have drawn someone with a very, you know, thin physique. Now, when it comes to faces, like I was speaking previously on, you normally want to have it so you can draw it with a ridge down their face. I normally like to have it so the ridge is pointed at an angle where the face is actually going, or where the face is actually facing, if that makes any sense. So, as an example, I'm having more of a side on, which is completely going against what I was saying before with keeping the face straight. But because I had screwed up with the neck here, with the width, I kind of want to have it so it's a more side-on view. And I'm also having it so when its face is, it doesn't really matter how close or how far apart the eyes are. When it comes to noses, once you draw that ridge, you can either have lots of detail or very little detail. As an example, you can have a nose that kind of swoops like that, and then you can have it so their nose kind of, you know, you have a little nostril. Heck, if you want, you can add little dimples like that, very thin. Or you can have a very anime style, which they have a little line and then like that, or like that. Or you can have it the typical, which I've seen quite a lot, and I've seen most people do, where they have like a little this. Usually I like to go with this. I know it looks weird, but for the way how I draw, it's pretty normal. I didn't necessarily draw it well here. It looks very foul, but as an example, I normally like to have it so the nostril and the nostrils go to either side. Whilst that, you also want to have a little bit of a ridge. So think of it more very thin, which will be where the mouth is located. Whilst at the same time, I normally this part you do after you draw the mouth, but I like to have a little bit more of a space for it. The chin, the issue when it comes to drawing mouths is the chin. If you don't want him to have the whole Giga Chad chin, you normally want to keep it so the mouth is quite low, whilst having the ridge of the nose quite, you know, close. But it can make a face look dysmorphed. It makes the face look odd or unappeasing or very hard to look at, which, as an example, if I... Sorry, it appears I had a difficulty recording. I don't actually know how much it skipped, so I might have actually just given a whole jump cut. I think it cut off where I was talking about the eyes or the mouth. But as I was saying before, you want to have it so the mouth isn't a straight line, but maybe add a little bit of texture. It gives it so you don't need to draw lips, which you still can, but I prefer to have it where you can draw a lips like that and then have like a nice, well, that's not really nice, but you like to have it so I can at least draw a mustache or something, you know, or a thick beard without having to be very deep with a, you know, lining a lip. I normally like to draw ridges on the eyes and a line underneath, which is like a form of the chin. You know, it gives it a little bit more realism whilst also making the character look a little bit more mature. There are 2 steps you can either follow. I'm going to do one on one eye and then do one on the other. With eyes, you want to have it so they're somewhat decently apart while somewhat together. This pen isn't necessarily the best pen for it, but I can still, yeah. You also want to have a little bit of a gap here. Just gives the eye a little bit more form. Depending whether or not you're drawing feminine or masculine eyes, it's a little bit more different. You can also have it, that was my PlayStation. Have it so, you know, eyelashes. Don't necessarily need to draw them. Or for eyelashes as well, it's easier if you just draw a little bit of a line like that. A little bit more depth. And then you can have it so you do this afterwards. Or you can have it so you do this part first. And then have it so you draw the eye. It gives it so a little bit more form when you draw without having to necessarily... You can see that the pen isn't necessarily helping me out. So I am running quite a bad operation here. Keeping the eyes together. After that, you can do a little bit more of a... I've noticed that now I'm talking in like a very essay fashion. I'm just, you know, very deep in my hobby. So then... keep it so there's a little bit of a gap. Eyebrows are really important features when it comes to a face. If a face has odd eyebrows, your brain kind of, in a way, focuses on the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. But eyebrows are very important. Eyebrows is basically what gives you, like, personality. You can draw a very simple face, but yet eyebrows can tell you everything about a character. Everything. And, like, how they're feeling at that very moment, what they're thinking. You can kind of picture it when a character has like, very descriptive or very, like, expressive eyebrows. What else? You can draw eye bags as well, which can kind of give a character a very tired depth, whilst also keeping a little bit of a sense of realism within that character. Now, irises. I always find it drawing irises being very simple. You know, you kind of just follow down. It looks very reptilian, but then if you like that, you slowly begin to form an image of an iris, and then you fill it in, and boom. Leave a little bit of light, because your eye naturally reflects light. So it looks a little bit normal. Here. And I think I might have given an uncanny vibe with my eyes. Not the look I was going with, but I think I did quite alright. I'm also going to end the video not a little bit earlier, just so I don't, you know, spend 50 minutes yapping. Now, you could, when it comes to hair, I know I've done this quite a bit, is boxing it up, or you can oval it, or you could just go right with it and start with hair, and then slowly detail your way around. Either one. I'm going to box it, because it's a little bit easier. So let's give him a nice little lineup. And give it so there's a little bit of a line, so it curves a little bit, giving his head a little bit more of a form. And hair. You can do any style with hair, whether or not it's straight hair, curly hair, it's... For me, it's easier to do curls. It's much easier to do curls. And I don't mean curls as in doing that. I mean curls as in flaking the hair out. And then slowly you will find how the hair will start to build up on itself. And it will give it a very realistic texture whilst keeping a very real look in the character. Also, do it a little bit towards the side, just to give that character a little bit more of a depth in shape. Simple strokes, just to define his head. Keep it nice and simple. You also want it so you can have parts of the hair that are darker. You will see that it's crucial for a character to have a little bit more darker hair in certain places. It makes it so the head looks less flat. It also gives it so a little bit more personality. And yeah, not a total pizza delivering looking guy, but a substandard individual. Could just fix that a little bit. And yeah, you got yourself an ordinary person. Just do that. And then you can do whatever you want with them, a little bow tie. Okay, that looks more like a... Yeah, I don't know how to describe that. But yeah, that's kind of my tutorial on how to draw faces in a very cartoony way. If you want realism, then I'm not the guy to support. But yeah, this is my